She didn't scream when they hit her the final time. She had no breath left for screaming. Anna Whitmore lay face down in the Montana dirt, tasting blood, listening to the sound of horses riding away, men laughing as they disappeared into the dark. They thought she was already dead. She almost agreed with them. The sky above her was enormous and completely indifferent, full of cold stars that didn't care whether she lived or died. Her fingers pressed into the earth. One breath. Just one more. If this story moved you, subscribe to this channel right now and follow Anna's journey all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments below so I can see exactly how far this story has traveled. Every single comment means the world to me. Now let's go back to that Montana road and find out what happens when the one person nobody expected decides that a woman left to die is worth fighting for. She had stopped counting her own heartbeats somewhere around midnight. That was the thing about dying slowly. There came a point where the body simply stopped arguing about it. The pain had moved from sharp and screaming to something dull and distant, like a bell ringing from the bottom of a well. Anna Whitmore lay still in the dust of a forgotten Montana trail and let herself stop fighting for exactly 17 seconds. She counted them. 1, 2, 3. She had always been the kind of woman who counted things: lesson plans, student names, evidence numbers in ledgers that didn't add up, and even now, with blood drying on her face and 3 ribs almost certainly cracked and her left eye swollen shut, some stubborn part of her brain kept counting. 17 seconds of giving up. Then she moved her fingers. Not because she had hope. She had run out of hope somewhere around the 4th blow when she understood clearly that no one from town was going to come riding down this road to save her. The people who knew where she was going that evening had either already been paid to stay quiet or were too frightened to make a sound. Anna understood that now. She understood a great many things now that she hadn't understood before, and the understanding felt cruel and heavy in her chest, heavier than the broken ribs. She moved her fingers because she was still breathing, and being still breathing felt like an accusation, like the universe was daring her to do something about it. The ground beneath her palms was dry and rough. Montana in August, the kind of summer that bleached everything pale and merciless. She pressed her hands flat and pushed, and the pain came rushing back all at once, sharp and furious. Everything she'd managed to go numb against, suddenly very much alive. A sound came out of her throat that she didn't recognize, something between a gasp and a moan, and she stopped moving and simply breathed through it, in and out, slow and deliberate, the way her mother had once told her to breathe through the hardest moments. "You're still here," she told herself. That means something. She didn't fully believe it, but she said it again anyway. Her vision in the one eye that still opened was limited and wavering. The trail stretched out in both directions. She could just make that out. Dark smudges of pine on either side, a pale strip of dirt down the middle, and above it all that enormous Montana sky with its indifferent stars. No lantern light anywhere. No sound of wagon wheels. Nothing moving except the dry grass making small sounds in a wind she could barely feel. They had taken her horse. Of course they had. They had taken her bag, her coat, and everything inside both, including the copies of the contracts she had been carrying with her to show to the land commissioner, who was supposed to be passing through Red Hollow by morning. Charles Beaumont's men were thorough. She had to give them that. Except they weren't as thorough as they thought. Anna pressed her cheek against the dirt and let herself think about that, the one thing she was choosing to hold on to, the one card that hadn't been knocked from her hand. The original copies, the ones that showed everything, the forged signatures and the false dates and the names of the families whose land had been quietly stolen through paperwork designed to confuse people who hadn't been taught to read legal language. Those copies were not in the bag Beaumont's men had taken. She had not carried those originals with her. She was not completely without wisdom, even if the evening's events suggested otherwise. But none of that mattered if she died on this road tonight, which was looking like a very real possibility. Anna did a careful internal accounting of her injuries, the way she used to take stock of her classroom at the end of a difficult day systematically, without panic, accepting what was true. Left eye swollen shut, a cut above her right eyebrow that had bled significantly, but appeared to be slowing. Her lips were split. Several teeth felt loose, though she thought they were all still present. Ribs on her left side, 3 of them at least, screamed when she breathed too deeply. Her left wrist had a sharp pain that made her think something might be cracked. Both knees were torn through her dress. Her right shoulder had taken a blow that left her arm weak and tingling. She was not going to be able to stand up and walk anywhere. That was the honest truth of it. So she pressed her hands into the ground again, accepted the pain as the price of movement, and began to drag herself. Not toward anything in particular. There was nothing particular to move toward, but off the center of the trail, because if another rider came through in the dark, she did not want to be run over on top of everything else. That would be a humiliation too far. She made it perhaps 4 feet before her arms gave out entirely. Anna lay where she stopped and stared at the stars and had a conversation with God that was neither polite nor particularly faithful, but was at least honest. "I know I haven't been inside a church in 3 years," she said not aloud, because she didn't have enough air for that. "But I have done my best to do what was right. I found the truth. I wrote it down. I tried to tell someone. I am trying right now to stay alive so that I can finish what I started. So if you have any interest at all in justice, I would appreciate some help, whatever form you think appropriate." She closed her eye, the one that still opened, and listened. Wind in the grass. Somewhere far away, an owl. And then beneath all of it, something else. A sound that didn't belong to the wilderness. A slow and steady rhythm that she had to lie completely still to hear clearly. Hoofbeats. Coming from the south. Anna's eye opened. The sound grew slowly, unhurried, the walk of a horse that wasn't being pushed and wasn't in a hurry. She tracked it by sound alone at first, then by the faint vibration she could feel in the ground beneath her cheek, and then, as it grew closer, by the first suggestion of lantern light swaying through the trees at the curve of the trail 200 yards away. One rider, one lantern, moving at a walk. Her first thought was not relief. Her first thought was Beaumont sent someone back to make sure. Her second thought arriving hard behind the first. It doesn't matter. I cannot move. She stayed still. She kept her breathing as shallow and controlled as she could manage, though each breath was a negotiation with the cracked ribs. The lantern light grew, swaying gently with the horse's walk, and she could hear the creak of leather, now the soft sound of the horse's exhale, the occasional small click of a hoof on a stone in the trail. The rider came around the curve. She could see the outline of him, tall in the saddle, a wide-brimmed hat, a horse that moved steadily and without nervousness. Not rushing, not looking for something, just traveling. He was going to ride right past her. She was 4 feet off the trail. In the dark, with only one small lantern in her dark dress against dark ground, he was going to ride past and never see her. And then she was going to spend the rest of the night, however much night was left to her, alone on this road. She opened her mouth. What came out was not a word. It was not a scream. It was something smaller and rougher than either a sound of pure effort, the sound of a woman spending the very last coin she had. But it was enough. The horse stopped. The lantern swayed and stilled. "Hello." The voice was a man's, low and careful, not raised, the way a man raised his voice when he expected trouble, but alert, listening. Anna made the sound again. She heard the leather creak as he turned in the saddle, heard him speak quietly to his horse, and then the lantern light began to move off the trail through the grass toward her. She could track it coming. 20 feet. 10. 5. Then the light fell across her and stopped moving. A long moment of complete silence. She couldn't see his face clearly. The lantern light was behind him, putting him in shadow. But she could see that he had dismounted. She heard his boots hit the ground, and that he was crouching down beside her, and that his voice, when he spoke again, was very quiet and very careful, the way a person spoke to something frightened. "Ma'am?" A pause. "Can you hear me?" "Yes," Anna said. It came out as barely a whisper. "I can hear you. Don't move yet." Another pause. She heard him set the lantern down on the ground beside her, and the light shifted and steadied. I'm going to check if you're... I'm going to see how bad it is. All right, I'm not going to hurt you. She didn't answer that. She was using all her remaining energy to stay conscious. His hands, large and careful, and considerably more gentle than she'd braced for, moved across her injuries with a focused efficiency that told her he'd done something like this before. Not a doctor's hands, but a working man's hands that knew the difference between wounds that could wait and wounds that couldn't. Ribs, he said more to himself than to her. 3, Anna said. I think 3. A pause. You counted them. I count things. Another pause, and then something happened that she didn't expect. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, too short and too surprised to be a real laugh, and she felt very faintly the strange sensation of almost wanting to smile. Arm, she said. Left wrist, and my eye. The left one. I can't open it. I can see that. His voice stayed level. The eye is swollen, not it doesn't look like the eye itself is damaged. The wrist I can't tell without better light. He pulled his hands back. I'm going to lift you. This is going to hurt. I know. I'll be as careful as I can. I know, Anna said again. She had expected careful to feel more like gentle. It didn't, it couldn't, given the state she was in, but he did something that she would think about later in the quiet of recovery when she had enough distance to examine the memory. As he slid his arms beneath her and began to lift, he spoke. Not comfort exactly. Not you'll be all right, or don't worry, the kinds of things people said when they didn't know if they were true. He just talked. My horse's name is Cooper, he said as he got her up off the ground, and she gripped his jacket and made a sound she was not proud of. He's a steady animal. He won't spook. You don't have to worry about the horse. She hadn't been worrying about the horse. She was worrying about her ribs and the darkness swimming at the edges of her vision, and whether she was going to lose consciousness before she could say the thing she needed to say. But the sound of his voice, flat and unhurried and completely matter-of-fact, like a man reporting on the weather, held her to the surface of awareness like an anchor line. I'm Ethan Walker, he said, as he carried her back toward the trail, toward the horse, who stood exactly where he'd left it, ears forward and patient. I've got a ranch north of here, about 2 hours' ride. Martha Collins lives a mile up from me. She knows medicine. I'm going to take you there. Anna's hand tightened on his jacket. She started. You don't have to tell me anything right now, he said. Not tonight. There are men, she said, because she had to say it, because he needed to know what he was walking into. Men who did this, they may come back. A pause. Did they see which way you fell? They left me for dead. Then they're not coming back tonight. His voice was steady. Folks who leave someone for dead don't ride back to check. They want to believe it without looking. He settled her onto his horse with a care that cost her a great deal of pain and cost him what looked like considerable physical effort. And then he mounted behind her, not in front, behind, so that she was held against him and couldn't slip, and picked up the reins with one hand and kept the other arm around her, and she felt Cooper begin to move beneath them, a slow and rocking walk. What's your name? He asked. After a silence that might have been 5 minutes or 15, she was losing track of time. She thought about lying. Old habits. The last several weeks had taught her to be careful about who she gave her name to, because her name had become a dangerous thing to know. But she was on this man's horse, going to this man's neighbor's house, and he had lifted her out of the dirt without asking anything in return, and she was very tired. Anna, she said. Anna Whitmore. He didn't say anything to that. Didn't say he'd heard the name. Didn't say he hadn't. Just kept Cooper walking north. Thank you, Anna said, after another silence. She was fighting the darkness at her vision's edges, now pressing it back through sheer stubbornness. Don't thank me yet, Ethan Walker said. Wait till we get there. She thought she might have laughed if she'd had more air for it. Instead, she let herself lean back against the solid wall of him and focused on staying awake, counting Cooper's footsteps. She counted things and letting the cold Montana night move past them and trying not to think about Charles Beaumont and the men he had sent and the evidence she still had hidden in a place they didn't know about yet, and what in the world she was going to do next. She didn't know what she was going to do next. but she was breathing. And there was a man at her back who hadn't asked her to explain herself before deciding she was worth saving. For tonight, she told herself. That was enough for tonight. Martha Collins was 63 years old, 4 feet 11 inches tall, and the kind of woman who had seen enough of frontier life that not much surprised her anymore. She had delivered babies and laid out the dead and treated everything in between. When Ethan Walker knocked on her door at something past 2 in the morning with a woman draped unconscious across his arms, Martha looked at the woman, looked at Ethan, and stepped back to let them in without a single word of exclamation. "Lay her on the table," she said. "The one in the back room. Light the lamps." Ethan did both. He had been to Martha's house in emergencies before, not often, but enough to know where things were, and he moved through it quietly and quickly, while Martha bent over her patient with the lamp he'd lit, and began a systematic examination that was both thorough and entirely unsentimental. "How long ago?" Martha said. "I don't know. I found her on the South Trail around midnight. She was conscious when I picked her up. She faded about a half hour out." Men did this. It was not a question. That's what she said. Martha made a sound low in her throat that conveyed a great deal of opinion without being specific enough to quote. 3 ribs, maybe 4. This wrist, she examined it with careful fingers. Cracked, not broken clean. The eye looks worse than it is. She'll keep the eye. She straightened. She needs to be cleaned up and wrapped. She needs something for the fever that's going to come. It's already starting feel here. She took Ethan's hand without asking and pressed it to Anna's forehead. It was warm. Too warm. She needs fluids when she wakes up, and she needs rest, and she needs somebody to stay with her because she's going to fight in her sleep for the first few nights, and she'll hurt herself if she moves too fast. Ethan pulled his hand back. "I'll stay." Martha looked at him sideways. "She a stranger?" "Found her on the road." "You know anything about her?" "Her name is Anna Whitmore. She said men did this and that they might come back." He paused. "She said she didn't want anyone else pulled into danger." "That's a woman who's been taught that her problems are a burden," Martha said flatly. "Don't let her send herself away before she's healed. She won't survive it." She turned back to her patient and began gathering what she needed. "You can wait in the front room. This part isn't for you." Ethan waited in the front room. He sat in the chair that faced the window and looked out at the dark and didn't think about very much, which was one of the things he was genuinely good at. He had spent 9 years alone on his ranch, becoming skilled at not thinking about things. Not about the war, not about the years before the war, not about the brother he hadn't spoken to in a decade, and the woman he'd stopped himself from writing letters to years ago. He could sit with a blank mind for a very long time. But tonight, sitting in Martha's front room, with the low sound of her work in the back and the Montana dark outside the window, his mind did not stay blank. It kept returning to the dirt trail. To the sound he'd heard, that small rough sound that hadn't been a word and hadn't needed to be. To the way she'd grabbed his jacket when he lifted her. Not with helplessness, there was nothing helpless about the grip, but with a fierceness that said, "I am not going to let go." He didn't know what had been done to her. He didn't know who Charles Beaumont was. He didn't know what evidence she'd mentioned, and then decided not to mention. He had questions the way any reasonable person would, and he had filed all of them away neatly under "not tonight" and left them there. But he thought about that sound she'd made, the one that had made him stop. He'd almost been past her. Another 10 feet, and she'd have been behind him, swallowed back into the dark before he'd processed what he'd heard. He'd been tired, and thinking about getting home, and the part of his brain that had been trying for years to convince him that other people's problems were not his problems, had almost won again tonight. Almost. He sat in Martha's chair and watched the sky begin very slowly to change at its edges, the deep black going gray, and then a pale and watery blue, and he didn't congratulate himself on stopping, or condemn himself for almost not stopping. He just sat with what had happened and let it be what it was. Martha came out of the back room when the light was fully changing. "She's stable," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee with the particular efficiency of someone who had been awake too long and was conducting a ceasefire with exhaustion. Fever's not as bad as I thought it might go. She woke up twice and she's sharp. Even in pain, she's sharp. She looked at Ethan with something that was almost approval, but not quite. She kept trying to ask me questions about you. Ethan looked up. What kind of questions? What kind of man you were? Martha sat down across from him. Whether you'd been the one to hurt her and brought her here afterward out of guilt. A silence. What did you tell her? I told her that in 30 years of knowing you, you have never raised your hand to a person who didn't need it raised to them, and even then you do it like you're apologizing. Martha sipped her coffee. She was quiet for a while. Then she asked if you were the kind of man who expected something in return for kindness. What did you tell her? I told her I'd never seen you collect on a debt. Martha set her cup down and looked at him steadily. She's in trouble, Ethan. More than a beating. Whatever she got beaten for, it's still out there. And so are the people who did it. I know. You don't have to involve yourself further. You got her here. That's more than most would have done. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Outside, the first birds were beginning. Somewhere to the east, a pale line of light was cresting the mountains. She said she didn't want anyone else pulled into danger, he said. That's not the same as saying there isn't any danger to be pulled into. Martha looked at him. No, she agreed. It's not. Ethan stood up, picking up his hat from where he'd set it on the floor beside the chair. I'll ride back to the ranch and get a few things. Come back this afternoon. He settled the hat on his head. If she wakes up and asks, tell her I'm coming back. Martha raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? He thought about the sound she'd made in the dark, the grip on his jacket, the way she'd said, I count things with a split lip and 2 broken ribs, like she was apologizing for being the kind of person who noticed. Tell her, he said, and walked out into the early morning. He was back by early afternoon, as he'd said, with a change of clothes rolled into a saddlebag and a tin of coffee from his own supply, and a practical indifference toward any complications this decision might bring. He had spent the ride back to his ranch and the ride back to Martha's, thinking through the situation in the flat, an unromantic way he thought through most situations, which was to list what he knew, identify what he didn't know, and determine what could reasonably be done. What he knew, a woman had been beaten badly and left on the South Trail. She was a schoolteacher named Anna Whitmore. She had said something about men and about evidence and about not wanting anyone else in danger. She was hiding something not out of dishonesty, he thought, but out of the calculated caution of someone who had learned that sharing information could cost you. What he didn't know. Everything else. What could reasonably be done? Wait. He was good at waiting. Anna Whitmore was awake when he arrived, propped against pillows on Martha's spare bed, with her left wrist wrapped and her ribs bound, and the left side of her face a map of bruise colors that made something in Ethan's jaw tighten in a way he kept carefully off his face. She watched him come through the doorway with the single eye that was fully open, and the other eye swollen and purple and still largely shut, tracked him too in its way. He set his hat on the table beside the door. Miss Whitmore, he said. Mr. Walker. Her voice was rough and careful. Martha told me you were coming back. I said I would. People say a lot of things. He took the chair that was against the wall, the one that Martha had clearly placed there for exactly this purpose, and pulled it to a reasonable distance, and sat down, settling his hands on his knees. That's true, he said. I came back anyway. A silence. She was looking at him with an assessment that he recognized the careful measuring of a person who has learned to read situations fast, because being wrong about a situation had cost her dearly. You don't know who I am, she said. I know your name. My name won't tell you anything useful. Then tell me something useful, he said. When you're ready. Her one open eye narrowed slightly. Not with hostility, with something more complicated than that. You're not going to ask me questions. When you're ready, he said again. Another silence. Martha appeared in the doorway, briefly looked at both of them, and disappeared again with the discretion of a woman who had seen enough to know when to leave a room. Charles Beaumont. Anna said finally. Ethan knew the name. Most people in the territory knew the name the way you knew the name of a coming storm. Beaumont was a landman. That was the polite way people said it. He bought property and developed it and acquired more property, and he had a way of ending up with land that its previous owners had not intended to sell. He was known as a hard businessman. He was known for having lawyers and money. He was not known for this. "What did he do?" Ethan asked. "He's been stealing settlers' land." Anna's voice was flat and controlled, and gave away very little of what it cost her to say it. Families who came out here to homestead. People who can't read legal language well enough to know when a contract is fake. He draws up documents that look like legitimate purchase agreements or debt arrangements, gets people to sign them when they're confused or scared or just trusting, and then 6 months or a year later, they find out they've signed over everything. She paused to breathe careful, shallow breaths, the rib breathing of a person working around pain. "I was teaching at the schoolhouse outside of Red Hollow for 3 years. Children of those families. I heard the stories. I started asking questions. And then you started finding things." Her eye met his. "I found a great many things. The evidence you mentioned. I had copies made. I was going to take them to the land commissioner who was supposed to come through Red Hollow this week." The flat voice wavered slightly just for a moment. "Beaumont found out. He sent men to stop me. They took what you were carrying. They took copies." She held his gaze. "Those were not the only copies." Ethan was quiet. "I'm not telling you this because I need your help," she said, and something in her tone made it clear she was reciting a position she had been rehearsing since she woke up. "I'm telling you because you should know what you've gotten yourself into by bringing me here. Beaumont has reach. He has money, and he has men, and he will find out I survived, and when he does, he will come looking. Anyone connected to me." "Miss Whitmore," Ethan said. She stopped. "I've been living on a mountain by myself for 9 years, he said. "I've been doing that specifically so that nothing anyone does can touch me. I know what I've gotten into." A pause. "Then why?" He thought about the sound she'd made in the dark. He wasn't going to say that out loud. "Because you were still breathing," he said instead. "And a person who's still breathing deserves a chance to live." He picked up his hat and turned it once in his hands, a habit, not nervousness. "Beaumont has reach in the towns. He doesn't have reach on my mountain. And Martha's place is outside his territory too." He set the hat back on his knee. "You don't have to trust me. You can leave as soon as Martha says you can travel, and I won't stop you. But while you're here, you're safe. That's all I'm telling you." She looked at him for a long moment. He let her look. "You don't know me," she said again. "No," he agreed. "I could be lying about all of it." "You could. And you'd still—" "I found you face down in the dirt with 3 broken ribs," Ethan said quietly. "I don't need to know the whole story to know you didn't deserve that." The silence that followed was different from the others. Something in it shifted, not resolved, not finished, but changed. He watched her look away toward the window, and he watched the side of her face that wasn't damaged, and he read something there that he didn't try to name. After a moment, she looked back. "I count things," she said. "When I'm frightened, I count things to stay calm." He remembered her saying it on the road. "I know," he said. "I counted 17 seconds tonight before I decided to try to move." She paused. "And then I counted your horse's footsteps all the way here. How many—" Something shifted in her expression. Not a smile, not quite, because smiling with a split lip was a complicated proposition, but something in the direction of one. 1,432, she said. Ethan Walker looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Cooper's going to be glad to know someone was paying attention." And Anna Whitmore, battered and wrapped in borrowed blankets in a frontier medicine woman's spare room, with Beaumont's men still out there somewhere, and the whole dangerous weight of the truth still in front of her, let out a sound that was unmistakably a laugh, short and painful and real, and pressed her wrapped hand against her ribs. "Don't," she said. Please don't make me laugh, it's expensive. I'll try, Ethan said. He almost meant it. He sat with her until she fell asleep, which took less than 20 minutes. Her body pulling her under, whether she wanted it to or not. And then he sat a while longer until Martha appeared in the doorway and looked at him with that almost approval expression. You staying? Martha said. Ethan looked at the sleeping woman in the bed, at the bruised face, and the careful wrapped wrist, and the lines of pain that didn't entirely smooth out even in sleep. For a while, he said. Outside, the Montana day was fully open, enormous sky, pale sun, the dry grass moving in a wind that carried no particular message. On his mountain to the north, his ranch sat empty and quiet the way it had sat for 9 years. He was in no particular hurry to get back to it. Martha brought him coffee. He drank it. He sat in the chair that she had placed there for exactly this purpose, and he watched the door, and he let the afternoon move past, and he did not think about Charles Beaumont yet. Not because Beaumont wasn't worth thinking about, but because thinking about Beaumont was a problem for tomorrow, and today still had hours left in it. Anna Whitmore slept, and Ethan Walker, who had spent 9 years convincing himself that caring about other people was a luxury a man in his position couldn't afford, sat in a chair by a door in a house that wasn't his, and kept a quiet watch over a woman he had known for less than 12 hours, and tried very hard not to examine why it felt like the most natural thing he'd done in years. Outside somewhere to the south, Charles Beaumont's men were already being told that the woman had survived, but they didn't know where she was yet, and Ethan Walker was going to make very sure it stayed that way. 3 days after Ethan brought her to Martha's house, Anna tried to leave. She didn't announce it. She didn't ask permission. She waited until she heard Martha moving around in the kitchen and Ethan's boots on the porch, both of them occupied, both of them not looking at her, and she swung her legs off the bed and stood up. She made it exactly 4 steps before her knees buckled. Ethan caught her before she hit the floor. He had come through the doorway at exactly the wrong moment, or exactly the right one, depending on how you looked at it. And his hands closed around her arms, and he held her upright with a steadiness that made her furious, because she wanted very badly to be the kind of woman who could stand on her own 4 steps from a bed, and she was not yet that woman again, and that fact felt like another thing the men had taken from her. "Let go," she said, in a second. He was guiding her back toward the bed with the same matter-of-fact efficiency he seemed to apply to everything. "When you're sitting down." "I said, let go of me." He let go. She sat down because she had no other option. The room tilted once, and then decided to stay put, and she gripped the edge of the mattress and breathed through the ribs and kept her face completely neutral, while Ethan Walker stood in the middle of the floor, looking at her with an expression that was not pity. She would have thrown something at pity, but was instead something quiet and complicated that she didn't have a name for yet. "You were trying to leave," he said. "I was taking a walk." "Without your shoes." She looked down at her bare feet. She said nothing. "Miss Whitmore." He sat down in the chair he was always in, that chair, always at that same careful distance, close enough to be present, and far enough away to not crowd her. "You nearly died 4 days ago. Martha says your fever broke, which is good. Martha also says that if you put strain on those ribs before they're ready, you could puncture something which would be considerably less good. I'm aware of my own body's condition." "Then you know you can't travel yet." "What I know," Anna said, keeping her voice level, "is that every hour I stay here is another hour that Beaumont's men get to figure out where I am. And when they figure it out, they will come here, and Martha will be in danger, and you will be in danger, and I will not. I will not be responsible for what happens to people who helped me." She met his eyes when she said it, and she meant every word, and she expected him to argue with the logic. She had prepared for arguments. She had spent 3 days lying in this bed preparing for every possible argument, because she was a woman who prepared for things even when preparing hurt her ribs. Ethan didn't argue. He leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees and looked at her for a long moment before he said, "You said the evidence is hidden somewhere they don't know about." "Yes." "Can someone find it? Someone without knowing to look for it?" No, it's no. It's safe where it is. Then it can wait a few more days. He held her gaze. And so can you. You're not listening to me. The risk. I heard you. His voice was even. You're worried about Martha and about me. I understand that. But here's what I need you to hear, Miss Whitmore. I decided to stay here. Martha decided to take you in. Neither one of us was tricked into this. You didn't ask us. We chose. He paused. You're not responsible for other people's choices. Anna stared at him. Something about the way he said it, calm and absolute without any performance of heroism in it, hit something behind her sternum that she hadn't been expecting, and she had to look away from him briefly toward the window while she put her face back in order. People have a habit of making choices on my behalf without considering the consequences, she said to the window. I'm not one of those people, Ethan said. I've considered the consequences. She looked back at him. And he didn't answer immediately. He turned his hat once in his hands. She had noticed he did that, and he seemed to be choosing his words with the same careful economy he applied to everything else. I've spent a long time keeping my head down and not involving myself in other people's trouble. I've gotten very good at it. He paused again. I'm choosing to be less good at it right now. The silence that followed was long enough that Martha put her head through the doorway, assessed the situation with a single practiced look, and disappeared again without a word. Anna looked at the man sitting across from her, at the squared-off jaw and the quiet eyes and the hands that had lifted her out of the dirt without asking what she'd done to end up there. And she thought about the 17 seconds she had spent deciding whether to keep fighting. 3 more days, she said. And then we discuss this again. That's fair, Ethan said. She lay back down. Her ribs argued about it, and she ignored them. Mr. Walker, she said to the ceiling. Ethan. Ethan. The name felt strange in her mouth, not unpleasant. I'm going to need paper and something to write with. When Martha says I can sit up properly. I'll get them. I need to write down everything I know, she said. All of it. In a form that can be sent to someone outside this territory in case... She stopped. In case something happens to you, he finished. In case something happens to the evidence, she said. Which was more or less the same thing, but felt more manageable to say out loud. She heard him stand up, heard him cross to the doorway. Ethan? She said again. He stopped. 1432, she said. A pause. She could hear the almost laugh in his silence. I'll let Cooper know, he said, and walked out. The paper arrived the next morning along with a proper writing desk that Ethan had somehow acquired from somewhere and set up beside the bed without being asked. Martha looked at it, looked at Ethan, and made a sound that was not quite a sigh and not quite an approval, but lived somewhere between the two. Anna wrote for 6 hours that day. Her wrist ached through the wrapping, and she switched hands when the pain became counterproductive and kept going, documenting everything in the precise and organized hand of a woman who had taught reading and writing for 10 years and knew how to make information clear. She wrote the names of the families who had lost land. She wrote the dates of the false contracts as best she could reconstruct them. She wrote what she had seen, and what she had found, and what she had done with what she found. And she wrote the location of the original copies in language, careful enough that someone who needed to find them could, but vague enough that it would mean nothing to anyone who didn't already know the shape of what they were looking for. She wrote until the light changed and her hands cramped, and Martha came in and told her with a look that conveyed no interest in argument that she was finished for the day. Eat something, Martha said, setting a bowl on the desk. In a minute. Now. Martha sat down on the edge of the bed, with the authority of a woman who had kept larger people than Anna Whitmore in line. And while you eat, you're going to answer a question. Anna looked up from her papers. Who are you going to send that to? Martha nodded at the stack of writing. Anna was quiet for a moment. This was the part she'd been turning over for 3 days. The problem that didn't have a clean answer. The land commissioner she'd been going to meet had been passing through, not stationed in the territory. She didn't know where to reach him now, The people in Red Hollow who had the standing to do something about Beaumont either owed him something or were afraid of him. The sheriff in town was a man named Harlan Graves, and Harlan Graves had been the first person to stop returning Anna's attempts to meet with him 3 months ago. "There's a federal marshal," she said finally, "based out of Helena. His name is Briggs, James Briggs. I've never met him, but I've heard his name from people who said he was clean, not bought." Martha considered this. "Helena is 4 days' ride." "I know. Ethan would need to carry the letter." "I know," Anna said again. "He'll say yes," Martha said. "I haven't asked him. Haven't asked." "You won't have to." Martha stood up, picking up Anna's empty bowl and replacing it with a fresh one in a maneuver too smooth to have been accidental. "That man has been sleeping in my barn for 5 nights. He didn't do that for the company." Anna looked at her. "Eat," Martha said, and left. Anna ate, and she thought about what it meant that a man she had known for 5 days had been sleeping in a barn rather than go back to his own land, and she turned that fact over very carefully in her mind. Not with hope, because hope was something she was currently keeping on a very short leash, but with something honest that she couldn't entirely deny. Ethan said yes before she finished the sentence. She had asked him that evening when Martha had gone to check on a neighbor, and they were alone for the first time without the buffer of Martha's practical presence. She had the letter folded in her good hand, and she had told him what she needed, and she had started to explain why it mattered, and he had held up one hand. "Yes," he said. "I haven't finished explaining. Helena Federal Marshal, name of Briggs. Martha told me." Anna lowered the letter. "Martha told you?" "She mentioned it." "Martha," Anna said, "is not as subtle as she believes herself to be." Something moved through his expression, not quite a smile, but in the general county of one. "No," he agreed. "She's not." She handed him the letter, and he took it, and she watched him fold it once more and tuck it into his jacket, and she watched his face while he did it. The same quiet face, the same unreadable steadiness, and she said, "You understand what this is. This letter is a direct challenge to Beaumont. If someone connects you to this Miss Whitmore—" Anna. A pause. His eyes met hers. "Anna." The name in his voice was different from how other people said it, not weighted with expectation or assessment, just said like a simple fact. "I've been making my own decisions for a long time. I don't need help with this one." She held his gaze. "You're carrying a target." "I've carried worse." She believed him. There was something in the way he said it, flat and without drama, that said this was not a brave man pretending not to be afraid. This was a man who had already made peace with certain things. "When do you leave?" she said. "Morning. I'll be back in 8 days, maybe 9. Martha will keep me alive, I know. She's very effective at it." Anna paused. "Be careful." He looked at her for a moment. "You too," he said. And then, because Ethan Walker was not a man who lingered, he stood and picked up his hat and walked out, and a few minutes later she heard hoofbeats fading north toward the barn, and then silence. 8 days was a long time. Anna spent them writing and healing and arguing with Martha in the proportions you might expect. The writing was the easiest part. She had always been more comfortable with paper than with people, and the work of organizing what she knew felt like doing something which was the only way she'd ever been able to manage fear. The healing was slower and more painful, and required her to accept help from Martha in ways that did not come naturally to a woman who had spent years being entirely self-sufficient. The arguing was mutual and mostly good-natured, and constituted, as Martha told her dryly on the 5th day, the most entertainment she'd had since the Whitley boy had gotten his boot stuck in a fence post and taken 3 men and a mule to remove it. On the 6th day, a man came to Martha's door. Anna heard the knock from the back room. She heard Martha go to the door, heard the low sound of a man's voice she didn't recognize, heard the short, precise rhythm of Martha's responses. She sat up in bed, and she was absolutely still, and she waited. The voices stopped. The door closed. Martha appeared in the doorway with an expression that was carefully controlled and gave Anna a sudden cold feeling in her stomach. Who was that? Anna said. Ryder from Red Hollow. Martha came in and sat down on the edge of the bed with the unhurried calm of someone deciding how to say a thing. He wasn't looking for you. He was passing through, stopped to ask about the road. But, Martha met her eyes. He said there's talk in town about a missing woman. Schoolteacher who disappeared a couple weeks ago. She paused. They're calling her a thief, Anna. Beaumont's people put out a story that you stole money from families in the settlement. Church donations, children's school fees. The cold in Anna's stomach spread outward. He turned her into the criminal, she said, flatly, not a question. He did. Anna's hands tightened in her lap. She thought about those families, the Hennessy family who'd lost 200 acres, and whose children she'd taught for 3 years, the Morales family who'd come all the way from Texas and had their deed pulled out from under them. After one winter, she thought about them hearing this story and wondering if the schoolteacher they'd trusted had also been lying to them. Does anyone believe it? She said. Martha was quiet for just a moment too long. Some do, she said. People are scared of Beaumont. It's easier to believe the story he tells than to believe the alternative. The alternative being that a powerful man beats women and leaves them in the dirt. The alternative being that a powerful man is a criminal, Martha said quietly. Which means the law should stop him, which means people have to stand up, which means they might become targets themselves. She looked at Anna steadily. Afraid people will believe a lot of things to stay safe. Anna knew this. She had known this. But knowing it in the abstract and hearing it spoken plainly about people she had taught and cooked Sunday dinners with, and stayed up late grading papers for, that was a different thing entirely. It sat in her chest alongside the cracked ribs and felt about the same size. The letter has to get through, she said. Ethan will make sure it does. If Beaumont's people are already talking, they may be watching roads. Ethan knows roads nobody watches, Martha said. It was said with a confidence that told Anna this was not a guess. She wanted to ask about that, about how Martha knew about what Ethan Walker had done in his life before a mountain ranch and 9 years of solitude, but she filed it away instead. There was something careful about the way Martha offered information about him in measured amounts, like she was reading a situation and deciding what served it. What Anna said instead was, I need to be on my feet by the time he gets back. Martha looked at her. Your ribs? We'll be angry about it, I know. Anna pushed herself upright against the headboard, taking the pain without flinching. I've been lying in this bed for 6 days, Martha. I've been grateful for it, but I cannot fight Beaumont from a bed. I need to stand up. A long silence. Martha looked at her at the bruised face that was fading from purple to yellow-green at the bound wrist at the set of her jaw that was not stubbornness for its own sake, but stubbornness in service of something. Tomorrow, Martha said finally. We start with 10 minutes standing, then we see. 20, Anna said. Martha raised her eyebrows. 15, Anna said. Final offer. Martha stood up. You'd have made a good lawyer, she said, which was from Martha Collins something very close to a compliment. She was walking without support by the time Ethan rode back on the afternoon of the 9th day. Not gracefully, the ribs were still negotiating their truce with the rest of her body, but steadily. She was standing on Martha's porch when she heard Cooper's hoofbeats on the road, and she watched Ethan come up the path with an expression she couldn't read from a distance and kept not being able to read as he got closer. He dismounted. He looked at her standing on the porch. Something shifted in his face, brief and quickly contained. You're up, he said. 9 days, she said. Was it Briggs? He came up the porch steps and stopped 2 feet from her, and looked at her with the same steady regard as always. And she thought not for the first time that she had never met a man so genuinely incapable of performing emotions he wasn't having. The letter got through, he said. Briggs received it. He read it in front of me. A pause. He said he's been watching Beaumont for 2 years. Didn't have enough to move on him. Anna felt the floor shift under her. And now, he said what I brought him fills a significant gap. Names, dates, the families he recognized, names that matched other complaints he'd heard but couldn't substantiate. Ethan held her gaze. He wants the original evidence. I know where it is. He wants to move within the month, before Beaumont has time to cover more tracks. Anna stood very still. A month. In a month, they would have to go back to Red Hollow, retrieve the originals, get them to Briggs, and do all of it, while Beaumont's men were actively looking for her with a story that made her the criminal. In a month, she would have to walk back into a town that had spent 6 days being told she was a thief, and stand up in front of people who might not want to believe her and tell the truth anyway. Her ribs ached. Her wrist ached. Her face still hurt when she laughed too hard, and she had to remember not to do that. "All right," she said. Ethan looked at her. Just like that. "Did you expect an argument?" "I know," he said. "Actually, I came back with a speech in case you did." She looked at him. What kind of speech? A pause. Something moved through his expression. She was getting better at reading them, these small, contained movements across his face. "The kind where I tell you that you don't have to do this alone." "Did you practice it?" "Some." The ribs hurt. She breathed through it. She looked at Ethan Walker, who had ridden 9 days round trip to Helena to deliver a letter for a woman he had found in the dirt, and who had prepared a speech on the off chance she needed convincing. "You can still give it," she said, "if you want." Something happened to his mouth then. Not quite a smile, but something that had the honest structure of one, and she noted it carefully the way she noted everything. "I think you already know what it would have said," he said. She thought she probably did. Martha opened the front door behind her before Anna could reply. "Are you two going to stand on my porch all afternoon?" she said. "Or is someone going to come in and tell me what that federal marshal said?" They both turned. Martha was standing in the doorway with her arms folded and an expression of supreme patience that indicated she had been listening through the door for at least the last 2 minutes. Ethan picked up his hat and stepped past Anna toward the door. "Briggs said he'd been watching Beaumont for 2 years, he said to Martha. Martha stepped back to let him in. 2 years, and he needed a schoolteacher to hand him the evidence. That seems to be the situation, Ethan said. Martha looked at Anna. Well then. She turned and walked back into the house, leaving the door open. Come inside and eat something, both of you. We've got a month to plan this, and I am not doing it on an empty stomach. Anna followed her in. She moved carefully. Ribs risked the whole complicated economy of a body coming back from the edge, but she moved. And as she crossed the threshold and let the door close behind her, she thought about the men who had beaten her and left her on the South Trail in the belief that she was a problem they had erased. She thought about the story Beaumont was telling in town with her name in the place where the criminal's name should be. She thought about those families, the Hennessy's, the Morales, all the others whose names were in the documents, who were caught between a story they'd been told and a truth they weren't yet sure they could afford to believe in. She had 17 copies of the evidence in a location that Beaumont's people did not know about. She had a federal marshal who had been waiting 2 years for exactly what she had. She had a month. And she was no longer the woman lying face down in the dirt. She sat down at Martha's table and accepted the bowl that Martha put in front of her. And across the table, Ethan Walker sat down and pulled off his hat and ran one hand through his hair and looked at her with that steady, unreadable regard, and she looked back at him, and neither of them said anything, and the silence between them was not the empty kind. Eat? Martha said from the stove without turning around. They ate. Ethan told them between bites what else Briggs had said about timing, about the legal process, about what would be needed when the time came. He said it plainly, without drama, and Anna listened and remembered everything and asked 3 questions that made Martha glance between them with an expression of poorly concealed satisfaction. Then, when they had eaten, and the bowls were cleared, and Martha was making coffee, and the lamplight was settling into the particular warmth of an evening that wasn't trying to be anything other than what it was, Ethan said, "There's something else." Anna looked at him. "Beaumont's not just looking for you," he said. "Briggs told me there's a warrant being drawn up, against you." She went completely still. "Beaumont has a judge," Ethan said. "A man named Foss. He's been in Beaumont's pocket for years. Briggs knows about him but can't touch him yet. Foss is drawing up a warrant for theft and fraud. He held her gaze, and his voice was level, but she saw something underneath the levelness, not fear, something older than fear. If you step back into Red Hollow before Briggs can move, you could be arrested. And if you're in Beaumont's custody while Briggs is still building his case. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Martha had stopped moving at the stove. Anna sat with this. She felt the shape of it, the complete and ruthless elegance of it. Beaumont had turned her into the criminal. Now he was going to make it legal. And with a warrant, he could take her in front of witnesses in front of the town, and no one would question what happened to her afterward, because the paperwork would say she was exactly what he had claimed. When, she said. Briggs thinks 10 days. Maybe 2 weeks before the warrant is signed and active. And Briggs needs a month. Yes. Anna looked at the table. She thought carefully. She had always been good at thinking carefully in bad situations. It was one of the things she'd had to become good at, being a woman alone in a world that was not particularly organized around the interests of women alone. Then we don't have a month, she said. No, Ethan said. We have 10 days. A silence. Martha set 3 cups of coffee on the table and sat down and looked at both of them with the focused intelligence of a woman who had survived 3 decades of frontier life by being practical when other people were being dramatic. Then you'd better start planning tonight, she said. Anna picked up her coffee. Her wrist protested the grip. She held it anyway. Somewhere south of them in the town of Red Hollow, Charles Beaumont was signing papers with his name on them, and believing, as powerful men so often believed, that paperwork was the same thing as the truth. He had no idea what she still had. He had no idea what was coming. She looked at Ethan. He was already looking at her. 10 days, she said. 10 days. He agreed. Outside, the Montana night was vast and indifferent and full of cold stars, the same stars that had watched her lie in the dirt on the South Trail and waited to see what she would do. She had moved her fingers. She had counted footsteps all the way here. She was still counting. They made their plan that night at Martha's kitchen table, with coffee going cold between them and a map that Ethan had drawn from memory spread flat under their hands. 10 days. That was what they had before Judge Foss signed a warrant with Anna's name on it. 10 days before a piece of paper would give Beaumont the legal right to take her, and everything that came after that would be done with the blessing of a corrupt court and nobody in Red Hollow asking too many questions. Anna looked at the map. She had her good hand flat against the paper, and she was tracing routes with her eyes, while Ethan talked, and the part of her brain that organized things. The school teacher part, the part that had survived this long by being more precise than the people trying to stop her, was already sorting what he said into columns of possible and impossible. The evidence is in the schoolhouse, she said when he paused. He looked at her. Under the floorboard beneath the 3rd desk from the left in the back row, she said. I put it there 6 weeks ago when I first understood what Beaumont was going to do when he found out I knew. I wrapped it in oilskin, and I nailed the board back down, and I covered it with the rag rug that was already there. She paused. I taught school on top of it for 3 weeks. Martha made a sound. That's either the bravest thing I've ever heard, she said, or the most foolish. I was hoping for efficient, Anna said. Ethan was looking at the map. The schoolhouse is on the east edge of town. It's one of the buildings furthest from Beaumont's office. He moved his finger to a point on the map. There's a back road that comes in from the north that doesn't run through Main Street. We could come in after dark. Anna said. Yes. You're not coming in with me. I'm not letting you go alone. She looked at him with an expression that had stopped being surprised by him and was now simply negotiating. You're known in this territory. If Beaumont's men see you with me, they connect you directly. Right now you have a level of distance from this that could protect you. I don't need protecting. Everyone needs protecting, she said, sharper than she'd meant it, and the sharpness surprised both of them. She looked back at the map and took a breath. I need you out of their sight until we have the evidence in hand and Briggs is moving. After that, it doesn't matter what they know. But right now, you are the only person I trust to get the documents to Briggs if something goes wrong with me, and you cannot do that from inside Beaumont's jail. The silence stretched. Martha, with her characteristic wisdom, said nothing. Ethan looked at the map. He looked at it for a long time. I'll be close, he said finally. Close enough. It was not agreement, not exactly. But it was what she was going to get. Close enough, she said. They left 2 mornings later. Martha packed them food and medicine and a second wrap for Anna's wrist, and she walked them to where Cooper was saddled and ready, and she looked at Anna with the specific look of a woman who has too many things to say and not enough time to say any of them with the weight they deserved. You come back, Martha said. I will, Anna said. Martha turned to Ethan. You make sure of it. Yes, ma'am, he said. Martha pulled Anna toward her by the good wrist and held her for exactly 3 seconds, brief and fierce, and saying everything the words hadn't said, and then she let go and stepped back and folded her arms and was practical again, which was how she handled every emotion she had ever had. They rode north first, then curved west and south to avoid the main roads. Anna had her wrist wrapped tight, and she sat in front of Ethan on Cooper, the way she had that first night, except that now she was conscious and aware, and had opinions about the pace which she voiced, and Ethan adjusted the pace which was the closest thing to an argument they had on the first day. On the second day, they stopped near a stream and ate, and Anna told him the rest of it. Things she hadn't told him at Martha's because she'd been thinking about what he needed to know versus what she wanted to say, and she had not yet learned to trust the difference. She told him about the first family she'd found the evidence for, the Dalton family, who had signed what Beaumont's men told them was a land improvement loan, and was in fact a conditional deed transfer that activated when they missed a single payment, which they did, because Beaumont's people had redirected their payment to a different account and marked them as defaulted. She told him about the Morales family, who spoke limited English and had signed a document that Beaumont's lawyer translated falsely on the spot. She told him about 7 other families she had documented and the 4 more she had evidence for, but whose cases she hadn't finished when Beaumont found out what she was doing. Ethan listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he said, How long were you doing this before they came after you? 4 months. Alone. I tried to involve the sheriff, Harlan Graves. She said the name the way you said the name of a wound that hadn't healed cleanly. He listened to me twice. Then he stopped returning my requests to meet. Then one of Beaumont's men came to the school and told me that a woman in my position, a single woman teaching on land she didn't own without family nearby, should be very careful about the enemies she made. Ethan said nothing. I should have moved faster, she said. I waited to make sure I had enough. I wanted it to be undeniable. I didn't want it to be my word against his money. She looked at her hands. By the time I thought I had enough, he already knew. You had enough, Ethan said. I was beaten on a road and left for dead, and he has a judge signing my arrest warrant, she said. You had enough, he said again. The problem was never the evidence. The problem was that he had people in place before you did. He shifted Cooper's pace around a rough patch. That's not your failure. That's what money does. She sat with that. She had been telling herself a version of that night for 2 weeks, the version where she had made an error in timing or judgment, where if she'd been smarter or faster or more careful, the outcome would have been different. It was the version she punished herself with in the dark hours. And here was this man in the matter-of-fact voice he used for everything, taking that version apart, not with reassurance, but with accuracy. That's what money does. Not, you did everything right. Just the system was rigged, and you ran into the rigging. It was somehow more comforting than the reassurance would have been. Ethan, she said. Why did you leave before, the 9 years on the mountain? She felt him consider whether to answer. You don't have to. I had reasons, he said. Some of them were practical. Some of them... He paused. I was in the war. After the war, things were different. People were different. The world wanted to be done with it, and I wasn't done with it yet. And there was a period where that made me someone I didn't want to be around other people. She waited. I went to the mountain, he said. I was going to stay a year, clear my head. Another pause. Then the year was easier than I expected, and the next year was easier than that, and at some point, it became the thing I did instead of the thing I was taking a break from. Do you regret it? She said. A long pause, longer than his usual. I regret some things about it, he said. Not all of it. She thought she understood what the sum was. She didn't ask him to say it. They reached the outskirts of Red Hollow on the afternoon of the fourth day. They came in on the northern back road, the one that bypassed Main Street, and Ethan found a position a quarter-mile from the schoolhouse, in a place where he could see the building and the road to it, and could not himself be easily seen. He did not like this part. She could tell he didn't like it, not by agitation, because he didn't agitate, but by the particular quality of his stillness, which was different from his usual stillness. Tighter, watchful. 2 hours after dark, Anna said. I go in, I come out. If I'm not back in 3 hours, you ride to Helena. I'll give you 4. Ethan. 4 hours, he said in the voice that meant there was no map table negotiation available. Then I ride to Helena. She looked at him. She had learned in 2 weeks of close proximity that there were moments when arguing with Ethan Walker was efficient, and moments when it wasn't, and this was not one of the efficient moments. 4 hours, she said. The waiting was the hardest part. Anna had always believed that action was easier than anticipation, and the 5 hours between their arrival and full dark confirmed this completely. She sat still and breathed carefully through her ribs and watched the light change and went over the route to the schoolhouse in her mind again and again until it was worn smooth. In through the back lot. The door she knew had a weak latch. The back row, third desk from the left. The rug. The board. The oilskin parcel beneath. She had done this. She knew where it was. She had done this. Stop, Ethan said. She looked at him. You've gone over it 20 times, he said. You know it. Stop going over it. How do you know I'm going over it? You move your fingers when you're running through something in your mind, he said. The way someone counts. She looked at her hand. Her fingers had been tapping lightly against her knee. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I do that, she said. I know. She folded her hand flat. After a moment she said, What do you do when you're nervous? The pause was brief. I'm not nervous. Ethan. Another pause. I get quiet. You're always quiet. Then you'd need a very precise instrument to measure the difference, he said, and she caught the slant of dry humor in it, and felt her shoulders drop about half an inch, which was the most she'd managed to relax in 4 days. The dark came. She moved. The route to the schoolhouse was less than a quarter mile, and she walked it in the dark with her good hand against the building walls, and her heart very loud in her ears, and her ribs informing her step by step that they considered this activity inadvisable. She told them to be quiet. They did not listen. The back door of the schoolhouse gave on the second push. She was inside. In the dark, by touch alone, she moved to the back row, counted desks 1, 2, 3 left side, crouched, ran her fingers across the floor until they found the edge of the rug, lifted it, found the board beneath. The nail heads were exactly where she'd put them. She worked the board up with the flat handle of the small knife Ethan had given her. She had asked him what it was for, and he had said everything, which was an answer she had found both unhelpful and accurate, and she reached into the dark space below. Her fingers found oilskin. She exhaled. She had the parcel in her hands tucked under her arm, and she was turning to go when she heard the front door of the schoolhouse open. She went completely still. Lantern light. 2 sets of boots. 2 men. Told us to check every building on this side of town. The voice was unfamiliar. Low and bored, the voice of a man doing a job he didn't find interesting. She's not going to be in the schoolhouse. A second voice, slightly younger sounding. Why would she come back here? Because the boss says she had papers here. Documents. He wants those more than he wants her. A pause. The lantern light moved. They were coming down the center aisle. Check the desks. Anna was in the back left corner. There was a coat room off the back wall. She knew this schoolhouse better than she knew her own reflection. And she moved backward, one careful inch at a time, keeping her breathing shallow and her boots absolutely silent on the wooden floor. And she reached the coat room door and eased it open, and stepped inside, and let it close behind her in the same moment that the lantern light reached the back row. She heard them moving, heard desks being shifted, heard the one with the bored voice say something sharp about the other one's search technique, heard the floor she had been crouching on 60 seconds ago, examined. "Board's been moved," the younger one said. A silence. "Recently," he said. Anna held the oilskin parcel against her chest, and she breathed through her ribs, and she counted. She counted seconds. She counted the space between her heartbeats. She counted the footsteps of two men moving toward the coat room door. The door handle moved. The door swung open. One of them put the lantern through the doorway. Anna was not there. She was on the other side of the coat room, which had an outside door. The door the children used to hang their coats before school, and she had gone through it while the man was crossing to the main door, and she was outside in the dark and moving. She heard one of them say something. She heard the outside door open behind her. She was already running, which hurt her ribs in a way that was essentially indescribable, and she was heading for the back lot, and she had the parcel, and she had 40 seconds of lead, and she used every one of them. She cleared the lot. She made the first building. She pressed herself against the wall and stopped and listened. Behind her, two men's voices, confused, not yet alarmed, looking in the wrong direction. She had come out the opposite side from where she'd gone in, and they were checking the east. She went west. She was back to Ethan in 12 minutes. He had heard something she could tell by the way he was standing when she came through the dark. Cooper's reins in one hand, and his other hand at his side, in the particular ready posture of a man who had been prepared to do something and was now reassessing. He saw her, and something in his posture shifted the tightness going out of it all at once. She shoved the parcel at him. There were men inside, she said, and she was breathing very hard, ribs and running and residual terror, all fighting for the same limited air supply. Two of them. They know the board was moved. They know someone was there. He took the parcel with one hand and put the other on her arm. "Are you hurt?" "No. We need to move. Right now." He had them on Cooper, and moving within 30 seconds, which was one of the things she had come to understand about Ethan Walker in a crisis. There was no gap between his decisions and his actions. He made up his mind, and his body was already doing it. They rode hard north. She didn't count footsteps this time. She just held on. When they had put 2 miles between themselves and Red Hollow, Ethan slowed Cooper to a walk, and she felt the tension in the arm around her change, still present, still alert, but no longer the wire-tight tension of immediate danger. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. She told him. All of it: the door, the men, the voices, the board, the coat room. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You hid in the coat room." "The outside door was open, while they were walking toward you. I moved while they were still at the board." Another pause. "That was very fast thinking. I used to watch children try to hide things from me," she said, and her voice came out slightly unsteady, which she decided was acceptable given the circumstances. "I learned all the good hiding places." She felt something happen in his chest behind her, a contained movement, an almost laugh. "Don't," she said. "Please don't make me laugh right now. My ribs." "I know," he said. "I know." But she laughed anyway, a short and painful and completely involuntary laugh, and pressed her arm against her side, and it hurt, and she didn't stop. They were 2 hours out from Red Hollow when they saw the fire. Not a campfire. Too large and too orange, and in the wrong place behind them, in the direction of town, but north of the main buildings. North, which was where Martha's house was. Anna saw it the same moment Ethan did. She felt him tense. "That's not—" she started. "No," he said. She felt Cooper's stride change as Ethan made a decision, and she knew before he said anything what the decision was. "Don't," she said. "Ethan, don't turn around. Martha. If they've gone to Martha's, they know she sheltered me. If they know that, they already know who to look for. Going back puts us in their hands." She turned as much as her ribs allowed to look at him, or as close to looking at him as she could manage from this position. "Martha knows how to take care of herself. You said so. You said she's taken care of herself for 30 years. He said nothing. "Ethan." Her voice was lower now, and had something in it that she hadn't intended, something that was not manipulation, not performance, but purely true. "She told you to make sure I came back. That's what she said." The arm around her was rigid. He did not turn back. Cooper kept moving north. She could feel the cost of it in every rigid line of him for the next mile, and she didn't try to talk him out of the feeling, or minimize it, or tell him Martha would be fine when she didn't know that for certain. She just sat within the circle of his arm and let him carry it. And she thought about Martha's 3-second embrace at the gate, fierce and brief and everything unsaid, and she held on to that. 3 hours before dawn, Ethan pulled them off the road without explanation. He dismounted and helped her down and led Cooper into a stand of trees and settled them into a cold camp. No fire, and Anna sat against a tree with the oilskin parcel in her lap and did not sleep. Ethan sat across from her 6 feet away and did not sleep either. "She'll be all right," Anna said in the dark. "You don't know that." "No," she agreed. "But I know that setting that fire was a message, not a punishment. Beaumont wants the evidence, and he wants me in that order. Hurting Martha gains him nothing. Burning her property is a warning." She paused. "He still thinks he can scare me off." Ethan looked at her across the dark. She could just make out the line of his jaw, the set of his shoulders. "He was wrong about you from the beginning," he said. It was said quietly. Not as a compliment exactly, as an observation, the same way he observed everything. She looked at the parcel in her lap. "I know why he thought I'd be easy to frighten," she said. "I was a single woman living on other people's goodwill. No family nearby, no official position or legal standing. Everything about my situation said I could be managed." She ran her thumb along the edge of the oilskin. "He forgot one thing." "What?" "I was a teacher," she said. "I have spent 10 years convincing 20 children at a time that they could do hard things." A pause. "At some point, you start believing your own lessons." The silence between them was very full. She heard him shift his position. She heard him reach into his jacket, the rustle of fabric, and when she looked, he was holding something out toward her across the dark. It took her a moment to see what it was. A small piece of dried bread from the pack Martha had sent with them, held out without comment, without ceremony, the way he did every kind thing he did. She took it. They ate in silence and waited for dawn with the parcel between them, and 6 days between them and Helena and Charles Beaumont's men somewhere behind them on the road. The morning came gray and cold, and they were moving again before the light was full, pushing north and east. Anna's ribs had downgraded their protest from outrage to complaint, which she counted as progress. Her wrist had tightened in the cold, but she could work her fingers, which was what mattered. On the second morning they found out about Martha, a rider on the road heading south, a homesteader. Ethan recognized a man called Prentice who ran cattle east of Red Hollow. Prentice stopped when he saw Ethan, and the way he stopped, the way his face went careful and deliberate before he spoke, told them both that what he had to say was not good. "I heard you were in the territory," Prentice said to Ethan, not to Anna. His eyes went to Anna once and then returned to Ethan and stayed there, which told her that in Red Hollow, her name was currently the kind of name people were being careful around. "What's happening in town?" Ethan said. Prentice looked at the road. "They burned the Collins place 2 nights ago, the house mostly. Martha Collins got out. She's at the Hennessy place north of town and she's unhurt." He paused. "They're saying it was an accident. Lamp fire." "Is Martha saying it was an accident?" Ethan said. Prentice met his eyes. Martha Collins, he said, is saying that she wants whoever did this to know that she has a very good memory and a considerable amount of patience. Anna felt something release in her chest. She pressed her good hand flat against her knee and breathed through it. There's a warrant, Prentice said. He was looking at his reins now. For the Whitmore woman. Signed 2 days ago. He paused. Judge Foss signed it. Theft and fraud. There's a reward. How much? Ethan said. Prentice named a number. Anna kept her face completely neutral. Beaumont put it up himself, Prentice said. He's telling people she stole from the school fund. Church donations. He paused again, and this time the pause had something uncomfortable in it, a man working out whether to say the next thing. There are people who believe it. There are people who don't. The ones who don't. He stopped. The ones who don't what? Ethan said. They're scared, Prentice said simply. They saw what happened to Martha Collins's house. He touched his hat brim, nodded once to Ethan, and rode on south. They watched him go. He knows who I am, Anna said. Yes? He could claim the reward. Prentice lost 40 acres to Beaumont 3 years ago, Ethan said. He's not claiming anything. She absorbed that. The landscape of this fight was more complicated than she'd seen from Martha's spare room. It had layers, histories, a whole web of grievances and alliances that had been forming for years before she'd arrived and started asking questions. He said people are scared, she said. They are. When Briggs moves when the warrant is in his hands and Beaumont is in custody, will they come forward? Ethan was quiet for a moment. Some will, he said. Some will need to see that it's real before they risk it. That's fair, she said. I'm not angry at afraid people. He looked at her. I'm angry at the man who made them afraid, she said. That's different. He held her gaze for a moment and then looked back at the road. 4 more days to Helena, he said. I know. How are the ribs? Negotiating. He nodded once, the way he nodded when he'd received the information he'd asked for and had processed it and was filing it under noted. She had come to find that nod deeply reassuring, which said something about what 2 weeks and a great deal of shared danger could do to a person's definitions. They were a day out from Helena when Beaumont's men found them. There were 4 of them. They came up from a side road in the early afternoon, not riding fast, which was somehow more frightening than fast, because it said they weren't worried about being caught. They spread across the road with the ease of men who had done this kind of thing before, and the one in front was a broad-shouldered man with a flat face and cold eyes, who looked at Ethan and then at Anna, and then back at Ethan with the particular expression of a man completing an arithmetic problem. That's her, the man said. Ethan had stopped Cooper. He was between Anna and the 4 men on the road, which was either an accident of position or not, and Anna was quite certain it was not. There's a warrant, the flat-faced man said. For Anna Whitmore, theft and fraud. We're taking her in. To Red Hollow, Ethan said. His voice was exactly as calm as it always was. That steadiness Anna thought was either the most reassuring thing she had ever encountered or the most terrifying, depending on which side of it you were on. That's right? Judge Foss's warrant. That's right. Federal Marshal named Briggs is going to have something to say about that, Ethan said. The flat-faced man's expression didn't change. Briggs isn't here. He will be, Ethan said. A silence. Step aside, the man said. No, Ethan said. The word was very simple. It didn't have any performance of courage in it, just a flat, declarative fact. No. Like he was correcting an arithmetic problem. The 4 men on the road looked at him. He looked back at them. Anna's hand found the rifle butt behind Ethan's saddle. The rifle she had asked him to show her how to operate on the 2nd day of riding, and he had with the same matter-of-fact completeness he brought to everything. She had told him she'd never fired one before. He had shown her twice, and then made her show him, and then he had said good in the tone that meant he actually meant it. She had her hand on it now. There are 4 of us, the flat-faced man said. I know how to count, Ethan said. Then you know how this ends. Ethan sat very still on Cooper. Anna could feel the quality of his stillness, the particular density of it, a man who had made a decision and was now simply on the other side of making it, waiting for the world to catch up. They already took enough from her, he said. His voice was quiet. Not soft quiet, which was different. The kind of quiet that had weight behind it. They're not taking her future too. Anna pulled the rifle free. The flat-faced man looked at her. She looked back at him. She had counted 17 seconds once and decided to keep fighting. She had counted 1,432 footsteps and let herself lean on a stranger. She had counted the seconds in a coat room while two men came toward the door and moved before they arrived. She was still counting. "Ride on," she said. Her voice didn't shake. She was faintly surprised by that she had expected it to shake and it didn't. "While you still can." The flat-faced man stared at Anna for a long 3 seconds. She didn't move. She didn't blink. She held the rifle with both hands, the bad wrist protesting every second of it, and she looked at him the way she used to look at the boy in the third row, who thought he could disrupt her classroom just because he was bigger than everyone else. The look that said, "I have accounted for you, I have made my decision, and I am not going to change it because you're unhappy about it." The man looked at the rifle. He looked at Ethan. He looked at the rifle again. "There are 4 of us," he said one more time. "I heard you the first time," Anna said. "And I'm not a good shot yet. Ethan told me so himself." She paused. "But from this distance, I don't think good is what's required." The man on the left shifted his horse. Ethan turned his head 1 inch in that direction, and the man stopped shifting. What happened next was not heroic, and it was not dramatic, and it did not look like anything from a dime novel. It looked like 4 men doing arithmetic and arriving at an answer they didn't like. The flat-faced man held the stare for another second, then he turned his horse. The other 3 followed. No words, no threats. They simply rode back up the side road they had come from and disappeared. Anna lowered the rifle. Her hands were shaking. She hadn't noticed that while she was holding it. "That was well done," Ethan said, quietly, the way he said everything. "I was terrified," she said. "I know." "Could you tell?" "No," he said, "and neither could they, which is the only thing that mattered." She exhaled. She put the rifle back and pressed her shaking hands flat on her thighs and breathed through the ribs until the shaking stopped. It took about 30 seconds. Ethan didn't fill those 30 seconds with reassurance or commentary. He just waited, and she was grateful for that, in a way that she was getting tired of not knowing how to express. "They'll follow us," she said when she could speak steadily. "At a distance," he said. "They'll want to know where we're going, which means Briggs needs to know we're coming." Ethan was already turning Cooper back to the road. "There's a telegraph station at the next town, 8 miles. Can you send a wire without it being traced back to you?" "I know the man who runs it," Ethan said. She looked at him. "How many people do you know who owe you something?" A pause. "I've had 9 years to accumulate them," he said. They pushed hard those 8 miles. Anna watched the road behind them, while Ethan watched the road ahead, and Cooper moved with a willingness that said he understood the pace was not optional. At the telegraph station, Ethan was inside for less than 10 minutes. When he came out, he carried 2 cups of coffee that the operator's wife had apparently pressed on him as a matter of frontier courtesy, and he handed one to Anna and mounted and said simply, "He'll have people at the Helena office when we arrive. Briggs will come himself." The wire said come now, evidence in hand. He sipped his coffee. "Briggs strikes me as the kind of man who comes himself." They reached Helena the following morning. It was not the quiet arrival Anna had imagined in the half-coherent plans she'd made in Martha's spare room. It was not orderly or triumphant or clean. They arrived dirty and exhausted. Anna's ribs broadcasting their displeasure with approximately 12 hours of hard riding. Her wrist stiff and her left eye still carrying the last yellow-green traces of the bruising that had once swollen it shut. Ethan had a 3-week beard and the particular remote look of a man who had been running on purpose and stubbornness for too long. They looked like what they were. People who had been through something and were still moving anyway. James Briggs met them at the door of his office. He was a compact, gray-haired man of about 50 who looked at people the way Ethan looked at people directly, without performance reading what was actually there, rather than what someone was presenting. He took in Anna with one long look that went from her healing face to her wrapped wrist to the oilskin parcel under her arm, and he said, "Miss Whitmore, come in, both of you." Inside, Anna put the parcel on his desk and unwrapped it herself, which took longer than she wanted because the oilskin ties had gotten damp and then dried stiff. But she got them open, and when the documents were spread on Briggs's desk, she stepped back and let him look. He looked for a long time. He turned pages. He went back to earlier pages. He held one document up to the light and read it with the complete attention of a man who understood what he was reading. He set it down and looked at Anna. "You documented this yourself," he said. "Yes." "Starting when?" "4 months before they came after me," she said. "I taught the children of the families on that list. I heard the stories. I started asking questions, and then I started writing down what I found. You have first-hand accounts from the families themselves." "Not in writing. I have my notes from conversations, and I have the documents themselves." She indicated the stack. "The contracts are forged. The signatures on some of them, you can compare them to the same people's signatures on legitimate documents, things they signed at the land office, and the difference is, it's not subtle. Beaumont's people were not careful because they didn't expect anyone to look carefully." Briggs looked at Ethan. "Walker, you've been with her since I found her on the South Trail outside Red Hollow," Ethan said. 3 weeks ago. You witnessed her recovery. You carried the letter to this office. You were present on the road when Beaumont's men tried to intercept her." "Yes." "You're willing to put your name to that?" "I rode 4 days to put my name to it," Ethan said. "Yes." Briggs sat down behind his desk and looked at the documents for another long moment. "There's a warrant for you," he said to Anna. "Judge Foss, I've been aware of Foss for 2 years. He's been Beaumont's instrument in 3 other matters that I couldn't prove." He looked up. "This," he touched the documents, "gives me enough to move on both of them." Anna's breath came out in a long, careful exhale. "When?" she said. "I need 3 days to prepare properly. Coordinate with the territorial governor's office. We do this correctly, or Beaumont's lawyers dismantle it." He held her gaze. "I need you to stay in Helena until I move. Both of you. I need you available, and I need you where I can be certain Beaumont can't reach you." 3 days, Anna said. 3 days, Briggs said. "And then we go back to Red Hollow together." Those 3 days were the strangest Anna had spent since the whole thing started. There was nothing to do. She had spent weeks moving, or planning to move, or recovering, so she could move again. And now she was in a rented room in Helena, with the evidence out of her hands and inside federal walls, and nothing to do but wait while Briggs built the case properly around what she had given him. She sat with that idleness, the way you sit with something that doesn't fit in your hands. On the first afternoon, Ethan knocked on her door. "Martha sent a wire," he said when she opened it. Anna grabbed the doorframe. "Is she—" "She's fine," he said, and the relief on her face must have been visible because he said it again. "She's fine. She's at the Hennessy place. She's unhurt. And she says—" He paused, and she could see him controlling something in his expression. "She says to tell you she's already made a list of exactly what she's replacing, and she expects Beaumont to fund it personally." Anna laughed real and full and painful and pressed her arm against her ribs. "Don't," Ethan said, and she could hear the almost laugh in his voice, even as he said it. "I can't help it," she said. "That is the most Martha thing anyone has ever said." He leaned against the doorframe, and she looked at him at the tired eyes and the beard and the quiet that had been carrying her weight alongside its own for 3 weeks. And she said, "You should sleep." "I'm fine. You haven't slept properly in 4 days." "I've slept." "Ethan." She looked at him steadily. "I'm in a locked room in a federal building. Briggs has men on the door. For the first time in 3 weeks, you don't need to watch the road." A pause. "Go sleep," she said. "That's not a request." Something moved through his expression, a small brief thing that was not quite amusement and not quite relief. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and touched the brim of his hat and walked back down the hall. She closed the door and leaned against it for a moment. She had not let herself think too carefully about Ethan Walker in the past 3 weeks. She had been too busy surviving, and thinking carefully about him felt like a luxury that belonged to a different time, a calmer time, a time when she wasn't running from armed men and hiding in coat rooms. She had filed the thinking carefully away under later and kept moving. But here was later, or a version of it. 3 days with nowhere to run and nothing to do but exist in the same building as a man who had lifted her out of the dirt and never once made her feel like a burden for it. She sat down on the edge of the bed and thought about later. She thought about it for a while. Then she got up and asked the woman at the front desk for paper and a pen, and she sat down and wrote a letter to the Hennessy family, and then one to the Dalton family, and then one to each of the other families whose names were in the documents, telling them what was happening and asking them carefully, knowing what asking cost them, if they would be willing to speak to Marshal Briggs when the time came. She wrote until her wrist made the decision for her. Then she slept. On the second day, Briggs brought them into his office together and told them what was going to happen. He was going to ride into Red Hollow with 6 deputies. He had a warrant for Beaumont's arrest on charges of land fraud, document forgery, and conspiracy. He had a separate warrant for Judge Foss on charges of corruption of office. The warrant against Anna had been superseded by federal authority. Foss's signature was no longer valid, and he had paperwork to that effect signed by the territorial governor himself. "Beaumont will have lawyers there before nightfall," Briggs said. "That's expected. The legal process takes time. But the arrest is the beginning of the end for him, and he knows it. What will matter is whether the people he wronged are willing to testify." He looked at Anna. "I wrote to them," she said. "Last night, all 11 families I documented." Briggs looked at her for a moment. "You did that last night?" "I had paper," she said. He looked at Ethan. "She counts things and she writes letters," Ethan said. "That's how she operates." Briggs turned back to Anna with an expression that was not quite a smile but held one inside it. "Will they testify?" "Some will," she said. "The ones with the most to lose have the most reason to." She paused. "And the others, once they see that someone else went first, some of them will find the courage. Fear of Beaumont is real, Marshal. But so is what he took from them. That's real too, and it doesn't go away just because they're scared." Briggs looked at his desk. He looked at the documents. He looked at this woman who had been beaten and left for dead 6 weeks ago and was now sitting in his office with a healing face and a wrapped wrist, telling him with complete calm certainty how frightened people's courage worked. "Be ready at first light," he said. "Day after tomorrow. We ride back to Red Hollow." The ride back was different from every other ride. Briggs had 8 deputies. Not 6, he had added 2 after the telegraph conversation about Beaumont's men on the road. They rode in an organized formation, and they carried federal authority on paper and in their posture, and Anna rode between Ethan and Briggs, and felt the shape of the thing shifting beneath her. The long arc of the past weeks finally slowly beginning to curve towards something other than running. They were half a day out from Red Hollow when one of Briggs's forward deputies came riding back. "There's a man on the road ahead," the deputy said. "Waiting. He says he knows you're coming." Briggs's hand went to his sidearm. "He's alone," Briggs said. "Appears to be." "What's his name?" the deputy said. "He says his name is Prentice." Anna and Ethan looked at each other. "He lost 40 acres to Beaumont," Anna said quietly. "Let him through," Briggs said. Prentice rode up to meet them with the careful posture of a man who has made a decision that frightened him and is now on the other side of making it committed. He looked at Briggs first, then at Anna, and he took off his hat. "I heard you were coming," he said. "I rode out to tell you something." He paused. "There are 7 families waiting in Red Hollow. They came in from the settlements this morning. They said—" He stopped, tried again. "They said the Whitmore woman wrote to them. They said they're ready to talk." Anna's throat closed. She had not expected 7. She had hoped for 4, maybe 5 if she was generous with her hoping. 7 families who had driven wagons in from scattered homesteads, who had overcome the long months of fear and the story Beaumont had told about the thieving schoolteacher, who were sitting in Red Hollow right now, waiting for a marshal who hadn't arrived yet. 7, she said. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. 7 confirmed, Prentice said. He put his hat back on. I'm the 8th. He looked at Briggs. Tell me where to be and when. They rode into Red Hollow at midday. It did not look like a triumph. Anna had not expected it to. A triumph in a dime novel was crowds and cheering, and the villain already clapped in irons. This was quieter and more complicated than that Briggs's party riding into town, with the particular authority of Federal Badge's townspeople stopping on the street to watch, with expressions that ranged from relief to uncertainty, to the careful blankness of people who were not yet sure which way things would fall. Beaumont was at his office on Main Street. Of course he was. A man like Beaumont did not run, not when he had lawyers and money and the faith of the powerful that he would outlast anything inconvenient. He came out when he heard the horses, and he looked at Briggs and at the deputies, and at the federal warrants in Briggs's hand, and for just a moment, one brief unguarded moment that Anna watched from Cooper's back, she saw the arithmetic happen behind his eyes. Then his face went smooth and controlled the face of a man who had handled difficult situations before. Marshal, he said, I believe there's been some misunderstanding. Charles Beaumont, Briggs said. I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of land fraud, document forgery, and conspiracy. You'll come with me. I'll need my lawyer present before... You'll have access to your lawyer, Briggs said, after I've secured you. He nodded to 2 of his deputies. Beaumont looked past Briggs. He looked at Anna. She looked back at him. He had last seen her name on a warrant he'd had drawn up. He had last thought of her as a problem successfully managed, beaten discredited a criminal by legal paperwork. Someone who would spend her remaining time running rather than fighting. He looked at her on Cooper's back, and she watched him understand that he had miscalculated, and she let him look for as long as he wanted. She did not look away. Beaumont was taken into custody without incident. He went with the specific dignity of a man who had decided that his lawyers would handle this before tomorrow, and who was therefore not going to create a scene. What he did not know yet, what Anna knew and Briggs knew, and 8 families waiting in various corners of Red Hollow knew, was that the lawyers would not handle this before tomorrow. They would not handle it before the month after that. Because 11 families were eventually going to stand in front of a proper court and say what had been done to them, and Anna Whitmore was going to stand there too. And the documents that she had kept under a floorboard for 3 weeks, and carried in an oilskin parcel through armed confrontations and 200 miles of territory, were already in federal hands. The lawyers could not make those documents disappear. Ethan was beside her when the deputies led Beaumont inside. She felt him stop next to her, and she looked at his face, and she saw something that she recognized because she had felt it herself 3 weeks ago on the South Trail, when she had moved her fingers after 17 seconds of giving up. The particular expression of a person who had carried something heavy for a long time, and just felt the weight lift. It's not over, she said, because it wasn't. There was the legal process and the testimony, and the lawyers Beaumont was already mentally deploying, and all of the work that came after an arrest that wasn't an ending, but a beginning. No, Ethan said. But it started. Harlan Graves. The sheriff who had stopped returning Anna's request to meet was standing on the opposite side of the street. She saw him watching Beaumont being led inside, and she saw something move across his face. Something that might have been relief or shame, or the complicated combination of both, that faces put on when a long-suppressed truth finally forces itself into daylight. He did not look at Anna. She did not make him. That afternoon in the back room of the largest building in Red Hollow, a meeting hall that served as church on Sundays and town assembly on other days, 8 families sat with James Briggs and gave their accounts. Briggs had 2 men writing everything down. He asked questions with the efficient precision of a man who had been waiting to ask them for 2 years. Anna sat at the side of the room, and she did not speak during the testimony. This part was not hers. She had done her part, the finding, the writing, the surviving, the carrying. What these families were doing now was their own act of courage, and it did not need her commentary. It needed her presence. She was there, and she was witness, and she let that be enough. The Dalton family spoke first. An older man with a sun-weathered face and hands that had worked land his whole life, and his wife who was quieter, but whose eyes were absolutely steady. He said what had happened to them in the flat, unadorned language of a man who didn't have fancy words, but had the truth, and the truth was more than sufficient. Then the Morales family, then Prentice, then the others, each account layered onto the previous one, and in the aggregate, they built something that no single account could have built alone: a pattern, a system, a deliberate and sustained crime against people who had come to this territory with almost nothing and worked to build from it. Anna counted 7 families. Then an 8th walked in that she hadn't written to. She didn't know this family. The Fowlers Briggs confirmed their name, but the woman of the family looked at Anna across the room and said, "I heard about you. What you tried to do. I heard they beat you for it." She paused. Thought it was time someone came who wasn't scared. Anna pressed her hand flat on her knee and breathed through it. Ethan was sitting 2 seats down from her. She felt him look at her, and she kept her eyes on the Fowler family, and kept her face composed, which required more effort in that moment than the rifle had. Briggs wrapped up the session when the light changed. Outside, the town was beginning to understand what had happened. People gathered in small groups. The way people gathered when something they couldn't yet explain had shifted the weight of things. Anna could see them from the doorway of the meeting hall, standing near storefronts, talking in low voices, turning to look when the door opened. She stepped outside. She had expected many things in the weeks of planning this moment. She had not expected the boy. He was perhaps 11. One of the children from the outer settlement. She recognized. His face had recognized it for 3 years across the 3rd row of desks in the schoolhouse. His name was Thomas Dalton. His father had just spoken for 20 minutes inside. He came up to her with the directness that children had before they learned to be cautious, and he looked at her healing face and her wrapped wrist, and he said, "Miss Whitmore, Pa says you kept the papers." "I did," she said. "He says you kept them even after they—" The boy stopped, reassembled. "Even after what they did?" "Yes." He considered this. "Were you scared?" "Very," she said. He considered that too. "Pa was scared too," he said. "He said so this morning before we came. He said he was scared, but he was going anyway." He paused with the particular gravity of an 11-year-old working out a large thought. "He said that's what you're supposed to do." Anna looked at Thomas Dalton for a long moment. "Your father is a smart man," she said. Thomas nodded, satisfied that this confirmed what he had already suspected, and ran back to where his parents were standing. Ethan came through the door behind her. She heard him stop at her shoulder. "What did the Dalton boy want?" he said. "He wanted to know if I was scared," she said. "What did you tell him?" "The truth." A pause. She felt him shift his weight the way he shifted when he was considering whether to say the thing he was thinking. "Say it," she said. "I was going to say you should be proud of yourself," he said. "But I know you'll argue with me." "I won't argue with that," she said. She was looking at the families across the street, the Daltons, the Morales Prentice, standing with his hat in his hands, the Fowlers she hadn't met until an hour ago. "I was just doing what needed to be done." "Most people don't," Ethan said. "That's the whole point." She looked at him. He was looking at the street. The same quiet face, the same economy of expression. The same man who had stopped his horse on a dark road 3 weeks ago, because a sound in the dark had been insufficient to ignore, and had built a quiet, unassuming chain of decisions out from that moment that had led them here. "Ethan," she said. He looked at her. "When this is over," she said, "when Briggs has what he needs, and the case is properly built, and there's nothing left that requires running or hiding." She stopped. She had thought this through in the 3 days in Helena, and then unthought it, and then thought it again. I need to know what you're going back to. On the mountain. He held her gaze. His expression was the usual quiet, but something underneath it was different. Not unsettled, more like braced. Like a man standing at the edge of something he'd been approaching for some time. A ranch, he said. That hasn't had enough people in it. She looked at him. Is that an answer to what I asked? It's the beginning of one, he said. She looked at the street. She looked at the families. She looked at the town that was still processing what it had seen today, still deciding what it was going to be now that the weight had shifted. I'll need somewhere to stay, she said, while I testify, while the case proceeds. She paused. Red Hollow has a schoolhouse with a loose floorboard in the back row, which is not a recommendation. No, he agreed. Martha's house burned. It did. Your ranch is north of here. It is, he said. His voice was very even, the way it was when he was saying something that cost him more than it looked like it cost him. I could stay, she said, while the case proceeds, if the offer stands. A silence. The offer stands, Ethan Walker said. She nodded. She looked at the street. Good, she said. That's good. She did not look at him. He did not look at her. They stood in the doorway of the Red Hollow meeting hall in the long afternoon light side by side, and watched the town of Red Hollow begin slowly and cautiously and imperfectly to move toward something better. Inside, James Briggs was closing his notebooks. Across the street, Thomas Dalton was telling his father something and pointing toward Anna, and his father looked and nodded and put his hand on the boy's shoulder. In a jail at the end of Main Street, Charles Beaumont was meeting with his lawyers and explaining with great confidence all the reasons why this would not hold. He was wrong about that. But that particular correction was still a few weeks away. For now the day was long and the light was good, and the thing that had needed doing had been done, and Anna Whitmore stood in a doorway and breathed carefully through the ribs that were still negotiating and let the weight settle. She was still standing. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything. The trial of Charles Beaumont began 6 weeks after his arrest, and it was not clean, and it was not fast, and it was not the neat resolution that people in dime novels got when justice finally showed up. It was messy and exhausting, and on the third day, Beaumont's lawyers got 2 pieces of evidence temporarily excluded on a procedural argument that made Anna grip the edge of the gallery bench hard enough to leave marks. And on the 5th day, one of the families who had promised to testify didn't come. And on the 7th day, a man Anna didn't recognize stood up in the back of the courtroom and called her a liar loud enough that the judge had to clear the room. She sat through all of it. She sat through it the way she had sat in the coat room while 2 men came toward the door still breathing, counting moving when it was time to move. Ethan sat beside her every day. He didn't speak during the proceedings. He didn't need to. He was simply there with the quality of presence that she had come to understand was its own kind of argument. A man who had ridden 200 miles and slept in a barn and faced 4 armed men on a road sitting beside her in a courtroom, without fidgeting, without complaint, without asking anything from her except that she keep going. She kept going. Martha testified on the 9th day. She came in with the particular posture of a woman who had rebuilt something from ash and was not interested in discussing how difficult that had been. And she sat in the witness chair and she looked at Beaumont's lead lawyer with the expression she reserved for people who were about to discover they had underestimated her, and she told the court exactly what she had seen when Ethan Walker brought Anna Whitmore through her door. The injuries, the fever, the evidence of what had been done, and how recently it had been done, and what kind of person and what kind of force was required to do it. The lawyer tried to suggest that Martha couldn't be certain of the cause of Anna's injuries. Martha looked at him. I have been treating injuries on this frontier for 30 years, she said. I know the difference between a woman who fell off a horse and a woman who was beaten by multiple men. If you would like me to explain that difference in detail, I am prepared to do so. The lawyer declined. The gallery made a sound that was not quite laughter, but was in its family. Anna pressed her hand flat on her knee and looked at the table in front of her and did not cry, which cost her considerably more than the rifle had. Thomas Dalton's father testified on the 11th day. He brought the original contract he had signed, the one Anna had noted in her documents, the one with his signature that didn't match the signature at the land office, and he put it on the table in front of the court, and he said in the flat, plain language of a man who had never learned to be fancy, "I signed my name to something I was told was a loan. They took my land. I want it back." 6 other families followed him. And then on the 13th day, Anna Whitmore took the witness chair. She had thought about this moment for 6 weeks. She had thought about it during the ride to Helena, and during the 3 days waiting, and during the ride back to Red Hollow, and during every evening at Ethan's ranch when the work of the day was done, and she sat at the kitchen table with her notes and went over them one more time. She had prepared. She had organized. She had been precise and thorough in the way she was precise and thorough about everything. What she had not prepared for was the silence when she sat down. The courtroom went quiet with the specific quality of a room full of people deciding something. She could feel them, the families behind her, the townspeople who had come out of uncertainty or curiosity, or the long-deferred desire to see something resolve, the reporters from the Helena paper who had been there since day one. She could feel Beaumont at his table to her left, not looking at her, which was its own kind of statement. And she could feel Ethan in the gallery 6 rows back on the right side, the same quiet presence he always was. She looked at Briggs, who was seated near the front. He gave her a single nod. She turned to the court, and she told the truth. She told it from the beginning. Not the beginning of the beating, but the beginning of the questions. The first child who had come to school hungry, and when she asked why, had said they had to give the land money to the man. The first family she had visited. The first document she had asked to see, and the first time she understood what she was looking at. She told it precisely, and in order, the way she would have presented a lesson. Here is what I found. Here is how I found it. Here is what it means. Beaumont's lawyer cross-examined her for 2 hours. He suggested she had fabricated the documents. She told him where she had obtained each one and who had given it to her, and what the circumstances were with dates. He suggested she had a personal grievance against Beaumont. She asked him to identify the personal grievance, since she had never met Beaumont before this trial. He suggested her memory of events was compromised by the trauma of her injuries. She told him she had begun documenting what she found 4 months before she was injured, and that all documentation predated the attack, and she would invite him to check the dates. He suggested that a single school teacher without legal training was not qualified to identify document forgery. She agreed that she was not a lawyer, and then she directed the court's attention to the 3 specific technical indicators of forgery in the contracts. The inconsistent notary seals, the dating irregularities, and the signature variations, which Briggs had also had independently verified by a document examiner from the territorial capital. The lawyer sat down. The judge called a recess. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Anna stood with her back against the wall and breathed. Just breathed. Her hands were shaking again, the same way they had shaken after she lowered the rifle on the road. She pressed them flat against the wall and breathed through it. Ethan was beside her before she had finished the first breath. He didn't say anything. He stood next to her, the way he always stood, close enough to be present, far enough to give her room, and she thought, here is a man who has spent 9 years learning exactly how much space a person needs, and exactly when to stand in it. The lawyer was desperate, she said. When a lawyer is that aggressive on cross, it means he doesn't have anything better. I know, Ethan said. Briggs's document examiner testimony was the thing that mattered most. Mine just confirmed. Anna, he said. She stopped. You did well, he said. Simple as that. The same voice he used when he told her Cooper wouldn't spook. The same voice he used for things that were true. She exhaled. My hands are shaking, she said. I know. They shook after the road too, when I put the rifle down. I remember. She looked at her hands. She looked at the courthouse wall. She said, I counted in there. While the lawyer was talking, I counted the ceiling beams. She felt rather than saw the almost laugh move through him. How many? 14, she said. And 1 partial on the east end. Of course, he said. And then, very quietly, The jury is going to find him guilty. She looked at him. You organized 12 years of one man's crimes into something a room full of people could understand, he said. That's what you do. You make things clear. He held her gaze. It's clear. The jury found Charles Beaumont guilty on all counts. They took 4 hours. Anna counted every one of them. When the verdict came, the courtroom did something she hadn't expected. It didn't erupt. It didn't cheer or go wild the way crowds did in stories. It went very, very quiet for about 3 full seconds. And in those 3 seconds, she could feel the weight of something enormous slowly tipping over the long balance of fear and money and power that Beaumont had maintained for years, finally giving way. And then the quiet broke, and it was not a cheer so much as an exhale, a collective release of breath that a whole room had been holding for too long. Thomas Dalton's father sat with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. His wife put her hand on his back. Martha, 3 seats down from Anna, folded her arms and looked at the front of the courtroom with the expression of a woman completing a long, outstanding piece of business. Ethan was standing at the back of the gallery. Anna turned and found him across the room, and he looked at her with the same face he always had, and she thought, that man has looked at me the same way since the night he found me in the dirt. Not like I was broken, not like I was a problem or a burden or a complication. Just seen. Judge Foss was removed from the bench the following week. The territorial governor issued a formal statement about the scope of the fraud and the number of families affected. A process for land restoration was established, which would take months and require more legal work, and was not going to be simple for any of the families involved. None of it was simple, but it was moving. And Anna Whitmore, in the small kitchen of Ethan Walker's mountain ranch, was teaching herself how to live in a place that wasn't temporary. She had made the decision quietly, without announcement, the way she made most important decisions. She had stayed through the trial as agreed. She had stayed through Foss's removal. She had stayed to help 3 of the families navigate the first stages of the land restoration process because she understood the legal language and they didn't, and that was a practical contribution she could make. And somewhere in the staying, the temporary nature of it had simply stopped being accurate. Ethan never asked her about it. He didn't ask her to confirm plans or declare intentions or explain herself. He just made room in the ranch, in the daily rhythm of the place, in the small adjustments of a life that had been built for one person and was quietly becoming something else. He moved the extra chair to her side of the table. He ordered paper and ink at the general store in Red Hollow without her asking. He came home one afternoon with a blackboard, the kind that schools had strapped to the back of Cooper, with the patient dignity of a horse who had learned to accept unusual cargo. She had stood in the yard and looked at the blackboard, and then looked at him. Martha said you'd been asking about the children in the outlying settlements, he said. Whether there was a way to reach them, the ones too far from Red Hollow to attend the school in town. She looked at the blackboard. There's a room, he said. Off the east side of the house. It's been storage. It could be something else. She looked at the room. She looked at the blackboard. She looked at Ethan Walker, who had done this without being asked, and without making anything of it the way he did every kind thing he had ever done. You moved the chair, she said. He looked at her. The chair in the kitchen. You moved it to my side of the table. A pause. It was in an inconvenient position. Ethan. Anna. She took a breath. Her ribs were healed, now had been for weeks, and breathing didn't cost her anything anymore. She had stopped noticing that, until she noticed it right now, in the particular way you notice something good, when you realized it had been there for a while without you marking it. I need to say something, she said. He waited. He was very good at waiting. I came here because I needed somewhere safe, she said. That was the truth. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. She held his gaze. But I stayed because this is where I want to be. Not because I'm hiding, not because I'm recovering, because this is... She stopped. She was not normally a person who lost words. She found them. Because you are, she said. Here. And that's where I want to be. The silence that followed was the fullest silence she'd ever sat inside. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. The quiet face, the steady eyes. The man who had prepared a speech once in case she needed convincing, and never gave it because she hadn't needed it, and who had slept in a barn for 5 nights rather than leave, and who had put his body between her and 4 armed men on a road, and said simply no. "I moved the chair," he said, "because I wanted it there." She looked at him. "I ordered the paper and the ink," he said, "because I wanted you to have them." He paused. "I brought the blackboard because Martha told me what you'd been asking about, and I wanted to see your face when you saw it." "And," she said. "And it was worth the trip," he said, in the dry, flat tone that she had learned over weeks and miles, and all the accumulated weight of everything they had been through was his version of warmth. The warmth that didn't perform itself. The kind that just was. She almost laughed. Her ribs didn't stop her. "Ask me to stay," she said. He looked at her steadily. "Stay," he said. She said yes. Martha came for dinner that Sunday. She arrived with the practical efficiency of a woman who had rebuilt her house from scratch in 6 weeks, which she had the Hennessy family and 4 others having shown up with lumber and labor in a demonstration of community gratitude that Martha had accepted without sentimentality and with an itemized list of exactly what she needed. And she sat at the kitchen table that now had 2 chairs on one side and looked at both of them and said nothing for approximately 30 seconds. Then she said, "Well, it's about time." "Martha," Ethan said. "Don't Martha me. I've watched you make room for this woman in every possible way, except the one that counted for 3 months. She turned to Anna. "And you." "I know," Anna said. "Good." Martha said, and accepted the coffee Ethan put in front of her, and was satisfied. 1 year after the night Ethan Walker stopped his horse on the South Trail, the school opened. It was not a grand building. It was a room off the east side of a ranch house on a mountain north of Red Hollow with a blackboard and 8 desks that Ethan had built from lumber in the barn over the course of 2 weeks, and a rag rug on the floor that Martha had made, and a window that faced east and got good morning light. On the first morning, Anna stood in front of the room and counted the children. 12. More than she had expected. Children from the outlying settlements. Children whose parents had driven wagons an hour in the cold morning to get there. Children who had been told by those parents in the specific serious way that parents told children the things that mattered most. That this was important, that learning was important, that the woman who was going to teach them had done something worth knowing about, and they should listen to her. 12 children. 12 faces looking at her. She thought about the South Trail. She thought about 17 seconds and the sound of hoofbeats coming from the dark. She thought about a coat room and an oilskin parcel and a courtroom ceiling with 14 beams and 1 partial, and a man who said no to 4 armed men in the same quiet voice he used for everything else. She thought about what Thomas Dalton had told her. His father said, "I was scared, but I was going anyway. That's what you're supposed to do." She picked up the chalk. "Good morning," she said. 12 voices answered. Ethan was at the doorway when the first lesson ended. She saw him when she turned, just standing there, hat in his hand, leaning against the frame, with the ease of a man who had nowhere better to be. He watched the children file out, and he watched her, and his face did the thing, it did the small quiet shift that was the version of warmth that didn't announce itself. "How was it?" he said. She thought about it honestly. Her voice when she'd started had been steadier than she'd expected. The children had been attentive. 2 of the younger ones had fallen asleep briefly, and she had let them because they'd woken up curious, which was the best you could ask. Thomas Dalton's little sister, who was 7 and had enormous serious eyes, had raised her hand in the first 10 minutes to ask a question so precise and observant that Anna had to stop and simply look at her for a moment. "Good," she said. "Really good." Ethan nodded. He held out his hand. She took it the way she had taken the dried bread in the dark 3 months ago, simply without making more of it than it was, which was already everything. They walked out of the schoolroom together into the morning, and the mountain was cold and wide and indifferent, the way Montana always was, the way it had been on the South Trail, and the way it would be long after both of them were gone. But inside the house, 2 chairs sat on the same side of the table. And inside the schoolroom, 12 desks waited for tomorrow. And Anna Whitmore, who had been beaten and left to die on a forgotten road, and had moved her fingers after 17 seconds, and kept counting. Ever since looked at what she had built from the wreckage of what had been taken from her, and understood not as comfort, not as lesson, but as plain and irreducible fact, that the men who had tried to erase her had instead revealed exactly how much she could survive. They had made the worst mistake possible. They had left her breathing.